Welcome to the Talent Optimization Podcast, the go-to podcast for CEOs and HR professionals wanting to bridge the gap between the strategy and tactical implementation of talent optimization within their organizations. Through interviews, predictive index, and personal experience, your host, Tracy Shirk, helps you discover the facets of talent optimization from both a CEO and HR perspective to truly create the dream team for your organization. Are you ready? Let's get started.
Inspiring employees to perform, right? So when we talk about inspiring employees to perform, the first thing we want to look at is, what does winning look like? Do our employees know what they need to do in order to be successful? So welcome to the Talent Optimization Podcast. We are in episode number 120 today, and my name is Tracy Shirk, and I'm the Chief Talent Officer here at Elevated Talent Consulting. And as we kind of dig into, what is in every single job and what is specifically needed, it's one of those items that we call a job assessment, which is essentially saying, what is the purpose of this job? What natural behavioral traits does the individual need to have in order for them to be successful in the job? And then specifically looking at what skill sets do they need to have and what type of experience do they need to have in order to give the organization what the organization needs to be successful. And so one of the ways that we really dig into this is, of course, we have a process. And I think if you've listened to this podcast long enough, you know that we have processes for everything. And, we teach those processes in depth inside of our talent optimization programs, our top programs. And this specific topic, defining the role and the job assessment, is in our hire program. And our hire program will be starting in May. And so if you are specifically looking to potentially join our hire program, let us know. You can find that information in the show notes. So with that being said, let's go through what a job assessment is and what those specific steps are and why it is important. And before I jump into the why it's important, I want to tell you a story of how we've used job assessments. So I was working with a client, and this was a nonprofit organization that actually served Catholic churches. And they were hiring a marketing position. And again, small organization, about 25 employees. And this marketing position that they had was actually doing marketing, it was doing graphic design, it was doing branding, it was doing all the things, right? So when we started digging into, what was needed specifically in this position, one of the first questions that I asked them was, tell me about someone who's been successful in this position. And they all kind of looked at me and they're like, well, we've had a lot of turnover in the position. And I said, well, tell me why you've had a lot of turnover in the position. And what ended up coming out is that there was different priorities needed for that person based on who you were talking to. So the executive director had one set of priorities and expectations for this position. The director of sales had another set of expectations for this position. The programming director had another set of expectations for this position. And then the admin assistant had another set of expectations for this position. So as we're walking through it, I kind of took a step back and said, so when this person comes in, they essentially feel like they are an octopus being pulled in 8 directions and have no idea what winning looks like for them to be successful in this role. And they all kind of looked at me and were like, yep, maybe. But we don't like that. I'm like, yep, I don't like that either. So if that's what's currently happening, let's first and foremost acknowledge that that's happening. And for those of you listening, I just want you to take a step back and say, is that happening in my organization? And a lot of you are going to go, yep, it sure is. So now you're ready to listen, right? So what we then did is we did a number of items really walking through, what does this job need? So when we looked at what the job needs, we looked at it in 3 specific lenses. The first lens we looked at it in was the head, meaning what are the natural behavioral traits that we need for this position to be successful? So again, this was a marketing graphic artist type of position. And there was a number of creative things that we needed this person to do. So for example, they were creating, the slide decks and the handouts and everything for the curriculum that this organization was doing. They were also doing all the ads and the advertisements and the one sheets and the sales slicks. And then they were writing a lot of copy. So if we think about that, so we're writing copy, we're doing graphics, we're doing some really tedious administrative items along with some really creative items. We're pulling from, somebody needing to be really, really detailed to somebody needing to be really creative, and they moved fast. They needed kind of things to come out really quickly. So what was happening is that organization was essentially asking for a unicorn in this position. And so what I said, so are we creating this position right now because we're too small in order to hire two different positions? Is this actually two different positions that we're shoving into one because of the size of the organization? Kind of took a step back and said, yeah, actually we are. I said, okay, so if we were to break it out, what would that specifically look like? And what we found is that it would be that you have a creative individual that's creating the ideas, the branding. And again, branding is what is going to get you through the next 20 years, right? So branding means, hey, 20 years from now, we want to know who you are. Marketing is what you're doing in the next 20 days. And I got that from a colleague of mine. And I love that distinction and that differentiation, that branding is the next 20 years, marketing is the next 20 days. I was like, whoa, that mind blowing, right? So when we look at what this position needs, what we saw was we were really asking for two completely different things. So the next question was, okay, is there a different way that we can get some of these things done? And let's look at what has to be done in-house and what could be done out of house. So can we hire an agency to do a part of it? And then keep some items in-house where we could hire an individual that is, more junior or right out of school that has some of these very specific skill sets that then could work with somebody really experienced at an agency level or a contractor until we're big enough to bring an individual in from the outside. And so as you can see through this job assessment, looking at the behavioral pieces, we kind of started down that road. Of course, what you heard in that explanation is we brought in what skill sets are needed. Is it really marketing? Is it branding? Is it graphic design? Is it really administrative items that are happening to post this stuff out, in different websites, et cetera? So we were really able to distill down into buckets, into skill sets, into natural behaviors, what was needed. And what happened was we then went back and we recreated the job description, and then we tapped our network and found an agency to take care of some of the other pieces. And that did lead to, an individual that walked into the organization essentially knowing, hey, here's what winning looks like for me. So I'm going to back up a second and now talk about the steps, right? So I said there's three lenses that we look through. We look through specifically the behavioral lens. What are the behavioral traits that this individual needs in this role? Do they need to lead the team or do they need to lead through the team? That was a confusion point here. What we ended up with is that they really needed to lead through the team. They needed to be a great team player. They needed to follow the lead of the other key individuals in the organization. Did we need somebody that was really analytical or somebody that was out in front having, great conversations, kind of that mic in hand, et cetera? The answer was no. We truly did need somebody behind the scenes more analytical. We needed them creating the content and the copy and creating very specifically the graphics and putting everything together. So analytical, and there's creativity in that analytical. We didn't need them out in front being the PR, right? We needed the public relations. We needed them behind the scenes really being the individual putting all the content together. And then once we did that, we found everything we were really asking this person to do was very process oriented. And so we needed somebody that could follow the standard operating procedures once they were put together and hit those key deadlines. So that's some examples of how those behaviors came into play. And then we looked at what experience do we need? So now we knew that we needed somebody with some graphic design experience, somebody that had that back-end marketing experience. So that allowed us to really define what was needed. And then we were able to define what winning looked like as far as what were the deliverables in this role. So that's the step between behavioral, head, briefcase, what's specifically needed. And then the heart piece is the culture piece. So for this organization, they were an organization that was Christian, they were a Catholic organization. And so that became something that for them, bringing an individual in, knowing what the organization was, they can't and won't discriminate against that, but they also are promoting that to Catholic churches, right? So that's an example there of the type of organization. They're remote, they're high touch, all of those things. So once we had those things aligned, we then went and talked with those key stakeholders again and said, okay, now that we have some idea of what this looks like from each of you, let's make sure we really have it so that your expectations aren't conflicting with each other. And if you listen back a couple episodes, I talk about multiple competing priorities. Well, for the turnover that we had seen in this role, it was because there were multiple competing priorities that were never, that were never talked about. So what we did is we talked to the executive director, we talked to the admin person, we talked to the programming person, we talked to the salesperson and said, hey, what do you need from this person? Can we all get on the same page that this is exactly what we are going to be asking this person to do? And here's where those touch points come in for each of you. And we were able to come to agreement with that. So with that being said, that essentially takes us through, what a job assessment is, the key stakeholders in the job assessment. So the key stakeholders are, if you have somebody in the role that's amazing, great. You want HR involved because they're typically interviewing that person. You then want to bring in their supervisor. And if there's other directors that have a direct impact on the role, and then a skip level, meaning, hey, who's a supervisor that's one level above the supervisor that's supervising them? And we want all of those individuals to take that job assessment. So some of you may be going, this sounds like a lot of work, Tracy. I don't think that this is worth it. And here's what I want you to think about. Think about the turnover that's happened in your organization because you lacked clarity in the role. And when you lack clarity in the role, it's very difficult to inspire that employee to perform, but it's also very difficult to inspire the team because you have individuals that aren't pulling their weight. And sometimes that weight isn't being pulled because they don't understand what the expectations are or have the pathway to do it. So with that being said, that brings us pretty close to the end today. And so our key takeaways for executives listening in is to take the time to assess and really define each role in your organization. So, ensure that you and your team understands, here's the expectations of the role, here's what winning looks like. And we've double checked with the person in the role that they also have the same assessment and understanding of what winning looks like. And then for our human resources individuals listening in, I really want you to take a look at and think about the processes that you can put in place for the organization to be successful. Because here's the deal. Every time you put a process like this in place, not only are you as the HR leader more successful, the leaders in the organization and the organization as a whole is more successful. So for HR leaders listening in, you do need to advocate for yourself as to the processes that you need versus just putting out fires all of the time. And a key way you can do that is to join our Hire program. So this is a week that we spend in the Hire program of really creating job assessments based on your job descriptions. And our Hire program is a 24-week program that takes you all the way through every step of the way of how you hire individuals and set the foundational HR for your organization. So you can see the link to our Hire program in our show notes. And I just want to thank you so much for being with us today. And I hope that you have a fantastic rest of your day. Thanks so much.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Talent Optimization Podcast. You'll find more tools and resources for CEOs and HR professionals looking to bridge the strategies versus implementation gap of talent optimization at elevatedtalentconsulting.com. We've also created a free, valuable resource for you to begin bridging the gap called the Talent Optimization Foundation Membership Program. You can access it for free at elevatedtalentconsulting.com/foundation. Be sure to tune in next week for another episode to learn more about talent optimization and creating a dream team for your organization.